Today, I'm going to share with you 5 things that you can do, practical things, like actual things that you can do before starting a private practice. Let's get to it. Welcome back, and if you haven't been here before, my name is Matt. I'm a therapist and a group practice owner, and I also like to make a lot of videos just like this about how to start, run, and grow efficient private practices. If you haven't done so already, please do go ahead and subscribe down below. Hit the thumbs up button on this video, but only if you want to. There is no pressure. All right, let's jump into the very first thing that you can do. And so the very first thing that you can do is obtain malpractice insurance. If you're like me, then you work at a hospital or an agency setting where you never had to think about malpractice insurance. It was just provided for you. Even more, no one shared with you what malpractice insurance was. You didn't really worry about it. You never had to. But when you go into private practice, you need malpractice insurance. It's actually the very first thing that you need to do before ever getting started. So I would take a look. What are the different options? As a social worker, I use NASW's insurance. It's pretty good. However, there are tons of options out there. You can begin doing research on what malpractice insurance might be best for you. And just to give you a little bit of a background, you need malpractice insurance in order to protect yourself in private practice. There's a common misconception that if you start a PLLC or an LLC, that you're going to be protected, meaning all of your personal assets and finances will be protected from malpractice lawsuits. This is not true. As a therapist or a licensed professional, and I'm talking about the state of New York, I'm not sure if it's the same in every state, but as a licensed professional in the state of New York, regardless of whether or not you have a PLLC, a business entity established, you can still be sued and your personal assets can be at risk. This is always going to be the case for a licensed professional in the state of New York. You might want to check your state to see if that's also the case. It's a very common misconception. People think that if they establish a business entity, well, they're good. All their personal assets are protected. That's not the case. At the end of the day, the only thing you have protecting yourself is your malpractice insurance. So make sure you get malpractice insurance. Make sure your policy covers you well. And I know it can be daunting looking for malpractice insurance. I would begin by looking at your profession's association. So for example, for social work, we have something called the National Association of Social Workers. They actually recommend a particular malpractice insurance. So that's the one I went with. I know the American Psychological Association, they're going to recommend insurance as well. And the American Counseling Association, I believe that's what it's called for counselors, they also recommend a malpractice insurance. So a good starting point would be to start with your profession's association and see what insurance they recommend. And the second practical thing you can begin doing is establishing and writing out your practice policies. You don't need to have your private practice up and running to have policies. In fact, your policies need to be up and running before your practices. So you can spend some time writing out your policies. What's going to be your late cancellation policy? What are you going to do in case of an emergency? These kinds of things. You also need an entire intake packet for your private practice. These are things like informed consents, notice of privacy practices. Now, I do have a manual that I was selling on my website for a little while, a private practice guide, if you will. And inside that guide, I had my entire packet as an example. I might be taking that down in a little bit, but if you're watching this video, you might want to check the link down below to see if that's there. Regardless of whether or not you take a look at my intake paperwork, there are tons of other therapists and there's tons of companies that sell intake paperwork and packets. Now, that I would advise you would contact an attorney or a lawyer to talk about your intake paperwork. There are lots of lawyers who specialize in private practice and therapy. They're going to be the ones to talk to make sure your paperwork, your intake packet is well done, is done in accordance with legal standards. And ultimately, that's the most important thing. Creating your intake packet is something you can do before even starting your private practice. So go ahead and get started on that. Another thing I would do is I would set up meetings with an accountant and a lawyer. The reason why I would set up a meeting with an accountant is to talk about what your options are for establishing a business entity. Now, an accountant and a lawyer can both do that. However, with the business entity, there's a lot of different tax issues and tax concerns that an accountant might be really well versed to answer. So I would set up a call with an accountant and talk about how you set up a business entity. Do you want to establish a PLLC? Do you want to do a DBA? I mean, there's tons of options. And I make videos all about these topics as well, business entities and DBAs. I'll link a few of those down below. I would also set up a meeting to talk to a lawyer. And this relates to what we were talking about. You can go through your intake packet. You can talk about which legal guidelines you need to follow. Are you doing telehealth? What does that mean for you legally? What state do you need to be in? Can you practice across state lines? There's tons of questions that you need to ask a lawyer. You need to make sure that when you start your private practice, you're doing things in compliance with legal standards. So do you need HIPAA compliant email? What are the laws and rules of your state in regards to private practice? So I would come up with some questions for both an accountant and a lawyer. For the accountant, business-related questions, and for the lawyer, legal-related questions in terms of telehealth or therapy and laws that pertain to your license. And then set up meetings with both an accountant and a lawyer. These are really good practical steps to take before even starting private practice. Another thing I would begin doing would be testing the tools that you might want to use when starting your private practice. What am I talking about tools? You don't have a hammer or a screwdriver. No, but you do have an EHR, an electronic health record. Some people call it an EMR, medical record. And there are tons of options out there. For example, there's Simple Practice, there's Theranest. Is that what it's called? I think it's called Theranest. There's lots and lots of options. I personally use Simple Practice. It works really well. I like it. I have no complaints. But there are tons of options out there. And as a therapist in 2022, you're going to want an EMR so you can store your notes. This is where all your documentation lives. Now, the really cool thing is most of these different options offer a free trial. So if I were you, I would begin testing out different platforms and seeing which one you like. And right now you don't have any clients, so there's really no pressure. You can make test clients and test out the features. I really think that testing out the tools before actually starting practice is going to be really helpful. That way, when you have your first client, you're already good with your tools. You know exactly what you want to use, you know how to use it. It'll be just so much smoother to take on your first client already knowing which tools you're going to use. And then are you going to use something like Zoom if you're doing telehealth? Are you going to use Simple Practice's telehealth feature? I mean, there's different platforms that you need for private practice. Are you going to use Google Voice? Are you going to use a HIPAA compliant email? I mean, there's all sorts of things you might want to consider, and then you can test out the free trials. So if I were you, I would start to sign up for some 30-day or free trials, however long they are, and get used to the tools. And maybe you can even start to pick which ones you want to use when you start your private practice. I think this will be really helpful for you. And then finally, I would begin building a website. Now, a website is something you can build before even starting. You don't need to make it go live until you're ready, but you can spend time editing your website. So what photos are you going to put on your website? What kind of copy, which is basically the content, what are you going to write on your website? Are you going to have a scheduling feature on your website? Are you going to do a blog? I mean, there's all sorts of things you have to consider when it comes to building a website. And in 2022, I would argue that a website is crucial. It's basically how you advertise yourself. It's basically your business online. I mean, you kind of need a website now, right? If someone's looking for you, if someone wants to know about your business or your practice, they're going to Google it. And if nothing pops up, they're going to think something about that, right? It's kind of weird if you Google, Home Depot and there was no website, you'd be like, that's a little weird. I'm going to go somewhere where they have a website. I don't know, maybe that's just me. At the end of the day, I think beginning to build a website is going to be key. Now, there's a lot of different options out there. I made a video about that as well. I'll link it down below. I use Squarespace, but I also know there's options like Wix and Simple Practice as a website builder as well. And again, a lot of those have free trials as well. For Squarespace, they offer, a 14-day, something like that. You can play around with it. You can get used to it. Is this one you want to use? And again, there's no pressure because clients aren't signing up for your practice yet. You're not live yet, but you can start to build your website. Again, another thing I think would be really helpful. Anyway, those are 5 things that you can do, practical things that you can do right now, today, like actually check off a box, right? And who doesn't want to check off boxes as we work towards something? So begin with these things. I think it'll occupy a lot of your time, and I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you learned something, and I look forward to seeing you soon.